All right, we're going to go ahead and get started back on our presentations here. Geoff Cowan is going to be sharing with us about Redis and ExpressionEngine development.
Thank you. You hear me okay? Okay. So first of all, an apology in advance. I am not a designer, so my slides are shockingly boring. Next up, I just want to check with the locals. I have actually spent Minneapolis correctly, because I think I spell checked it several times, and I was kind of a bit nervous. Okay, so me, as this we have to do. So this is me. My name is Geoff. I run a one-man tech consultancy in the UK. I do kind of everything, but mostly it's kind of project lead stuff, project rescuing, and a hell of a lot of performance stuff. So if you need any of that, shout. As I say, I've been around EE since 1.6 something, those dark days all those years ago. But I tend not to do a great deal of kind of like regular ExpressionEngine sites. I tend to get involved in some fairly weird and wacky ways that people are pushing ExpressionEngine to its limits, which is where I found Redis. So where am I from? So everybody keeps asking me where I'm from, and when I say the UK, the normal response is that London? No. So I'm down in this little bit down there in Devon, which is down in the southwest, where we have kind of more cows and tractors than people, really. It's a beautiful part of the world. So when you think Britain, and my connector works, it was working. Is this a flaky cable? Maybe. Could be the shortest presentation ever. Thank you so much.
That works. That doesn't work.
It doesn't like a picture? WTF?
That's exactly
Awesome. Right. So slightly losing my flow. So yeah, when people tend to think of the UK, they probably think of a lot of this stuff. So if this works, that's basically my house. This down here, the internet's a bit shabby, so that's what we use. And now, we've been talking a lot the last couple of days, mostly in the pub, about the differences between American and British cuisine. And so this morning we were served breakfast that looks suspiciously like this, which I think you call biscuits and gravy or something. But this is really a cream tea, so that's what it's really meant to look like. Now, TJ gets slightly confused when it comes to fish and chips. So there's a rule here. Also, when you think of the UK, you probably think this at the moment, which is our kind of constitutional crisis that we're having at the moment. Let's not go there. Instead, I'd like to go on a slightly somber note and just say a quick word about a big guy in the ExpressionEngine world that we lost back in August. A lot of you will know him. He was a speaker at quite a few of these conferences, and I think he'd like to be remembered. So that's about it. Anyway, onwards, Redis. What the hell is it? Did you see the animation? It is indeed. It's an open source, stable, in-memory data store. It is not a database in memory. It's part of this thing that's called NoSQL, which does not stand for there is no SQL. It stands for not only SQL. So in most applications, it's used alongside traditional things like MySQL or Postgres or whatever else you're using. And it's fast. It's really, really fast. And it automatically handles things like partitioning, replication, persistence. So if you're dealing with really big data, it can handle it. You can spread this across multiple machines, multiple instances. It's great, but it's also mega efficient. So I think there's a bit down there, 1 million keys, about 85 meg, which is pretty good. So who's using it? There's a kind of few names you might recognize. I don't think they're using it with an ExpressionEngine, but they're using it in their own way. So what's it for? Well, I guess most people know it's caching. Quite a common question I've had over the last few days is, how does it compare to Varnish or to Memcache or to this and the other one? Whilst, yes, you can use it for caching, that's not really the only thing. I know that ExpressionEngine uses it as one of their options, essentially for its speed. It's also commonly used for these sort of scoreboards, leaderboards, lots of counts. So places like Reddit use it heavily for showing the use count and the view counts and all that sort of jazz. They do some quite fun stuff that I'll come to in a moment where they don't really need to show an exact number of that a post has had 1,587 hits or whatever. It's about 1 million. There's a built-in function with Redis that can handle that that's kind of funky that I'll touch on. It does a lot of things. I do a lot with this with searching and filtering. Again, I'll come to this. Expiry of content. When it comes to Redis, anything you store, you can set an expiry date on, which can either be in a set time, i.e. expire in an hour, or you can say expire on midnight on Christmas Day. And that's on a key-by-key basis. A lot of people are using it for real-time analysis. You use it to sort of fire up quick dashboards, so you can see what's happening with your application in real time. It's rather good for that sort of stuff. I'm not going to go into this because I really don't understand it, but basically you can do this sort of the publish-subscribe model where you have a publisher has a load of clients that are subscribed to it, and as soon as they just push out data to their clients, there's a whole set of methods that can handle this for you at some pretty huge numbers. So Twitter are using this extensively to push out tweets to each of your followers and messengers, or at least they were. They used to be a bit more open about how they did stuff, and it might have changed. And also, a lot of people use it for queues as well, so where things have to happen in a certain order, this can do it. Okay, so some techie stuff. How do you get Redis on your machine? As TJ was saying, if you're using Mac, Homebrew's excellent. It's easy peasy. There's also Mac ports, I think, still exists. If you're on Windows, there are ways of getting it. There isn't an official build for Windows, but now that Windows is turning into Linux with the Linux subsystem or whatever it's called, there's ways around it. Equally, you can throw it into a sort of a virtual machine or a Docker or whatever hipster thing you're using at the moment. Now on Linux, which is probably going to be your production server as well as maybe your local, avoid the ones that come with the distros. They're way out of date. It's a bit like on some distros still, if you type in, yum install PHP, I think they give you like 5.6 or something. It's a bit frightening. There are, depending on your distro, there are some dedicated repositories that package this all up. Or you could, be hardcore and sort of install it from source or something like that, but does anybody do that anymore? Okay, once you've got it, you get this kind of big scary thing, which is the config file. It's actually really good. It's well documented, it's in English, it makes sense most of the time. It lets you set all sorts of things you want to do. The key one that's even not on the slide is a memory limit. Because Redis lives exclusively in memory all the time, if you just keep feeding it data, it will use up every single bit of memory you've got and will kill your machine, especially if you're running Apache and all the other things on it at the same time. So you can set a hard limit, which is to make sure that everything else has got some breathing space. Also, you've got this key thing, which is that by default, you can only talk to Redis from the same machine. It's a security thing. You can open it up to the outside world, but as you'll see from the next slide, that will be a bit of a scary thing to do. Because if you've got access to Redis, there's no such thing as an ACL. There's no such thing as users at all, really. So if you've got access to it, you can run any command you like, including that kind of scary one at the bottom, which is this flush all, which kind of does what you'd guess it does. So you can work around it. You can put a password on, but that password, again, is for every single command out there. So this persistence thing, because it's all in memory, kind of what happens if somebody turns the machine off? And to be honest, you're screwed. But you're not really. Because what happens by default is there's these two different types of backup that are going on. RDB is essentially a snapshot. Again, in the config file, it's saying you just set a thing, and you can either say basically take a snapshot every minute as long as we've had at least one write. Or you might say take a snapshot every second. It's up to you. With those snapshots, you can then back them up, so you can run a scheduled task that throws them off to S3 or whatever it is and cycles them, and like you would with any other file. Once Redis starts up again after a failure, if there's an RDB file in its home folder, it loads it, and you get back to where you were. You can also use the save command to actually manually do it. So in your application code, you might say, okay, I've just done a whole load of important stuff. Make sure we've got a copy of this. AOF is a different type. This is where it's an append-only file. So every single write command that you make to the Redis store, it saves a copy of. And when it starts up again, it literally walks through them like a cassette play. It just, it's slow. But depending on how you're using your data and how important it is that you've got all of it when it comes back up again, will be your choice. As far as talking to it's concerned, there's a driver for pretty much every language you've heard of, and quite a lot of ones that I haven't. Thankfully, we're at an ExpressionEngine conference, so it's PHP. What does that say? You don't have permission. Awesome, because this is DJ's computer. Okay, you don't need to see this. The video was meant to be showing what's called the Redis CLI. So when you install Redis, you get a command line tool that's essentially an interactive environment. If you've used Python, I think you get idle, which is like an interactive shell. This is the same thing. You'll see it in a few slides anyway, where you'll just see some static versions. Okay, keys. What the hell are these keys? Keys are essentially like array keys in PHP. They're the name of what it is you're dealing with. You can call them anything you like. Generally, I've got there that I tend to you go for a naming convention that works with you and the rest of your team that makes some sort of sense. It's like the conversations we used to have a few years ago about naming custom fields and everything in ExpressionEngine. You can call them anything. It doesn't even need to be ASCII. You can actually give a key like the name of an image, a JPEG or something. It's kind of a bit wild. And yeah, you can set keys to expire. By default, they live forever until you manually delete them. But if you're going down the caching route, you're likely to say, okay, this will live 10 minutes, 1 hour, whatever it happens to be. At the bottom of all the next sort of sets of slides, I've got these things which are all the commands. Don't worry, there's actually not that many when it comes to Redis. And for each different type of data, they have their own sets of commands. And as you'll see, they kind of copy-paste as they go along. Okay, so Redis is not like a database. It's not like a relational database. How it stores its data is in these sets of types. And there's basically 5 or 6 key ones that were used all the time. And then, as I say, then there's some funky stuff where you kind of need a master's in computer science to figure out what they're doing. So let's start with the easy one, strings. It's just a string. It's just like a regular variable in PHP. It can be text, it can be a number. If it's a number, you can do operations on it, like basically increasing it, decreasing it. Super simple stuff for counters. Those numbers can also be floats and decimals and all that sort of stuff. You don't need to declare it, it just figures it out. So there's a whole set of commands down the bottom. They're pretty self-explanatory. Set a key, get a key. mset and mget are multi-set, multi-get, so you can do a whole batch of them at once. And then, yeah, increase, decrease, and set the expiries. So that's it running in your CLI that you should have seen in the video. So here I love these pointers. Just set it with the key of talk title. That's it. Get it. It's super simple. Hashes are strings on steroids, basically. You can just have lots of things in one key. It's used often to kind of store an object. You can't yet store JSON in it. It can't handle because it can't do multi-dimensional, so it can just do the one layer. Again, all of the commands are pretty similar. The clue's in the letter H. So again here, we multi-set user number 1, first name, surname. We can get it. We can then add things in on the fly. If we were then to set HM set user 2, but only give it a first name, that's fine. You don't have to, just because you've used one convention in one thing, even though you can do what you like with it, basically, because as soon as you get user-2, that's a completely separate key. The two are not related at all. Even though they've got similar names, they're completely in their own little worlds. This is where it starts getting fun. So lists, yeah, collections of ordered values, duplicates allowed. So this is, as we see here, our simple list. I think in computer science they call them linked lists, I think is the sort of the official term for them. And essentially, again, you just declare it as soon as you need it, and you L push or right push, so either at the beginning or the end, you can just shove a value on the end of it. You can then use all these commands to sort of say, okay, get them all in the order they're in, get me this between number 5 and number 10. You can start popping them on and off, so it's just like a regular array in that way. You can do all sorts of crazy things where you sort of grab a batch of them and create a brand new key out of them and do your own fun with it. So that's, as an example, for instance, you might be tracking each individual user and the path they're taking through your website as an example. It's pretty, so the last one, L range, so get me the range between 0 and -1, and -1 is basically the end. Sets. Wow, I'm going to be finished so soon. This is good. Sets are a collection of unique, unsorted string elements. That's a mouthful. Okay, what's this for? I use this a lot when I'm doing things like recording, say, categories, keywords, tags that things are in. So I create, for each, say, tag or color or whatever it happens to be, I create a set of all of, let's say, the entry IDs where that one's included. And I do that for each of the different types of tags, and then you can have lots of fun because you can use Sinters, unions, and this sort of stuff, which basically say, okay, get me all the ones that are combined from all this stuff. And that's pretty powerful. And this is where, when I first found Redis, maybe 5 years ago, I kind of fell in love with it. Because at the time, we were working on a huge stock photography site where in ExpressionEngine, which was not the wisest choice at the time, just for what we were doing, and the client wanted to have search. He wanted to have filtering, as I think earlier it was called faceted search, where you say, okay, I want all these stock images that are pink and they're in England and they contain food. That was starting to really slow down in search. We were struggling. We tried using low search, we tried using the built-in search. Maybe we didn't have the skills, but we went, this is crazy. So this is where we threw everything into Redis. And we went from sort of search page loads in the minutes down to milliseconds. Don't die. TJ, where's his password? Sorry? No idea? Okay, well, we're not getting anywhere with this. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah. You'd think you'd have set this up.
Just go to sleep.
Yeah. Talk amongst yourselves.
Two quick questions.
Sure.
How does, because it's in memory,
Yeah.
how does that potentially work with distributed servers?
Okay, so there's a built-in method with Redis where they can do clustering. So there's a full set of commands to do sort of master-slave replication or master-master-master, or however you wish to have it. You can have, you can tell it to write to one, and then it reads from all the others. It's pretty good. You can also do segmentation. So if you're running into really, really huge data sets, where it's not going to fit onto one server, that's a lot of data. You can actually tell it to do automatic segmentation where you say, okay, all user IDs under a certain number on this server, then this server, then this server. And you can also tell it to automatically fire up and just keep firing them up as they go. It's pretty clever. There we go. Thank you. So where was I? So that was sets. So I've got a little demo of that happening. So here we create the red set. We give it all the entry IDs, 1 to 5. S members lists them all out. By default, it lists all of them. Again, there's a whole set of options to say, okay, only give me the first 5 or the last 5 or all that jazz. Then we create a blue set, and then we create the intersection between all of them, which just returns those that are in both sets. And equally, with this syntax command, you could just string hundreds of these along, and it works. It's lovely. Okay, sorted sets are pretty much the last ones before it gets into the funky stuff. These are basically sets, but with a score. And the score is a number, and this is really great for when you're doing things like leaderboards and scoreboards and such. So here we go. We simply add 3. So it was meant to be Tom, Dick, and Harry, but I obviously forgot it wrong. But anyway, it's at which point they can bring them out in order. It's simple. Okay, so there's some other funky stuff. Okay, this is where I have to read the notes. So bit maps. It's possible using special commands to handle string values like an array of bits. You can set and clear individual bits, count all the bits, set to 1, find the first set or unset bit, and so forth. Whew. It's useful for handling lots of counts in a memory-efficient manner. It's hardcore. You only really get to this if you're doing huge sets and you want to squeeze a whole ton of stuff into memory. I've seen it where there's been like something crazy like 5 million, and it's done in sort of 15 meg of memory or something like that. And it's magic stuff. Okay, hyperlog. Has anybody heard of this as a kind of computer science thing? Okay, so this is what I was talking about when you want to get counts of huge amounts of data and you don't actually want to do the calculation, you just want to make this sort of educated guess. It's a probabilistic data structure which is used in order to estimate the cardinality of a set. Don't be scared, it's simpler than it seems. Honest. I'll let you believe me if you'd like. And then streams are an append-only collection of map-like entries. Are we all still awake? Okay. So getting back to where we're meant to be, using ExpressionEngine with Redis. And now this is where TJ, bless him, saved me a ton of work because he's just shown you all of it with Composer, so I don't have to do that. I use a client called Redis. They really thought hard about the name. So if I was creating a simple extension, it's pretty easy stuff. Create an add-on directory, Composer in it, which fires up your Composer. Assume you didn't have one already. Answer all the steps. Require this. Simples. Did I just jump? No. Okay. So this is just a really, really easy extension. So in this one, all I'm doing is I've got a custom field, which is just a text input, where I've just got a space-separated list. It could be anything else. It's just the easiest way to demo it. And what I want to do is every time these entries are saved, I want to throw this into Redis. So you have an addon.setup.php. We register the hook, a few settings. And with this one, I'm doing after channel entry update. But excuse me, it could be any one you wish. OK, so we require the auto load, which TJ is the expert. And we just bring up a new Redis client. It's wonderful. There's a whole ton of options you can go for the config, one of which is to have a persistent connection. So if you're throwing a whole ton of data at the Redis client, that might be optional for you. So when we fire the hook, we simply grab a new Redis client, and in this case, excuse my bad code, we just simply explode this field. It's great security because E is handling all that for us, isn't it? We then are deleting this key that's going to be called color:1 because we're just going to flush it basically. And then we're going to create the next set of keys. And then there they are. So this is like a super simplified version of what it can do. And I struggle trying to find an example that wouldn't be about 500 slides of what I'm doing. Because essentially you can do anything you like with it. It's your application, it's your custom app, it's your website. What's it doing? Why do you need this? So this is just a really simple way. Obviously, this is getting data out of ExpressionEngine, but obviously with a hook, you could be doing it the other way around and pushing it in. You'd then maybe have a plugin, which is then also talking to Redis, and is using maybe a URL segment to say, okay, what's going on here? Let's get some data back. So when we were writing the stock photography site, we were doing it all based on URL because they wanted the searches to be savable and to make sense. So we ended up having blah, blah, blah.com/colorred/colorblue/this. And the plugin, all it did was simply just read through it, looped through it, and said, okay, let's try and figure out where these all are. Threw it at Redis. That returned an array of entry IDs, and then we gave that back to ExpressionEngine to the EE entries. And it said, there they are. And it spat them out. So when you're coming into these things where there's a huge amount of content, that's where I find it really flies. So that's pretty much it, which is kind of good. So I'm steaming through. That's ExpressionEngine and Redis. I will be showing these slides because I've got some further reading where it really explains this bitmap craziness in detail. I've read it twice. I still don't really understand it. And then there's all the photos. So we've got a lot of time for questions or a lot of time for the pub. So shoot. Sure.
So I used Redis, I believe, a few years ago using CE cache, didn't you?
Yeah.
And so with that, I could install Redis server on the Linux box.
Mm-hmm.
But you just turn it on in EE, right?
Pretty much.
And so did CE cache basically kind of mask what the CLI is doing?
Pretty much.
That's probably why
that's all it's doing. So I think, I don't know the exact details, but I think essentially what it's doing is how it's storing it for full page caching. It was caching basically the key would be the URL, so the entry title or the entry ID, one of those. And then the value was literally the whole page. So when it said, and all it was doing every time to run the cache, it was saying, is there a key with this value already? Okay, return it. If not, let's actually render it through EE. And that was pretty efficient, as opposed to running it on disk or with all the I/O fun and games. And then, yeah, built into ExpressionEngine now, you can turn it on. But if and that's in your config file. So if you've got anything funky where you've changed the ports of Redis or whatever it is, that's where you go in and set it up. But you can pretty much, if you're on shared hosting and this, that, and the other, then they'll just install it for you. But it's really not difficult to get it on through SSH. It takes maybe a minute. Oh no, he's off again. Oh well, I don't need it. So yeah, any other questions?
So as you look at, have you used memcache? And it seems like the big difference is the persistence.
Yeah, that's pretty much the difference. The two are the same. Because memcache, I think you basically set an expiry for everything. That's about the difference.
I guess I could look up benchmarks for, but they're both in memories.
They're both in memory. They're both pretty much in the same league. From what I remember when I was doing the research, Redis pretty much blows most things out of the water. There's others. There's MongoDB, which is mostly on disk, but you can do a MongoDB in memory. Now there's an option to do it, and that's it. If you look at the benchmarks, it tends to be at extreme load where they start to bear apart. For the average site that a lot of us are working on, where you're not talking billions of rows, so you're probably not going to get into that kind of level. And these days, to be honest, with the joy that is sort of cloud hosting, you just grab the slider and go more, kind of thing. So Any other questions?
How do you handle persisting and backing up?
I tend to run a cron job. So basically I have in the config file, it's set up when to save that snapshot. As I say, it depends on the application. If I really need to make sure that all of that data is saved all the time, then I'll tell it to save constantly. And then I just simply have a cron job that says, okay, look in this folder, grab the redis.rdb and sync it over to S3. And equally then I've got a recovery script normally that if the proverbial hits the fan, it goes and grabs it and pulls it back again. And that tends to work pretty well. It also lets you do sort of versioning and snapshotting and all that sort of stuff. Does that answer your question? Cool. Any more? Sounds like beer o'clock.